So over the past few years, we've heard from many art institutions, from Hollywood to museums to theater companies, all pledging that they're going to work to make the arts a safer space for women. Today on the show, you'll hear about how this fight is going in the world of orchestras and music schools. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. Let me first say that today's story is not easy to talk about. It involves some deeply disturbing accounts of alleged bad behavior in the orchestra world, including at one of Canada's most prestigious orchestras. We are going to start with Calgary. As the Globe and Mail first reported, the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra recently removed 2 of its members. This came after investigation into what the orchestra called deeply troubling comments posted online. We should say neither of the musicians have spoken publicly. Josh O'Kane has been covering this story for the Globe. I spoke with him earlier, and I started by asking him what he's able to say about the removal of these 2 musicians.
Well, like everything these days, it started with some cryptic statements posted online. So on April 22nd, the Calgary Philharmonic posted on its Facebook a statement that said they'd be made aware of deeply troubling comments posted online that do not represent the views of the Calgary Philharmonic. And they said they would be investigating it as per their code of conduct and working with their musicians union. Then a month later came another statement saying that following independent third-party investigation into the matter, they're taking action. Now, they didn't quite say what taking action was. They said that due to privacy considerations, they're not going to be providing any detail or responding to questions about specifics. But by the time that second statement had come out, I was already looking around to try to figure out what exactly had happened. Yeah. And part of this was by doing some basic journalistic due diligence, and I saved a copy of the orchestra's member list to cross-check for later, which paid off because the day the second announcement came up, 2 members had been removed from that list. Now, I did contact the orchestra. They said they wouldn't tell me what action it had taken, but I started making calls and, in fact, confirmed that those 2 members had been removed from the orchestra. Now, I want to make it clear that the exact comments that these vague statements are referring to, they have not been disclosed, nor has the reasoning for their removal from the orchestra been disclosed, including if that reasoning was related to the initial comments. But what I can say is that screenshots had emerged going back as far as 2020 of a user bearing the same name as one of the now removed musicians using racist and misogynistic slurs, and that those screenshots have been circulating on multiple platforms.
Okay, so first of all, this story sounds awful, but second of all, I just want to shout out your journalistic due diligence here, the idea that you would just be like, you know what I'm going to do just for safety, I'm going to screenshot all the members who are currently present of this orchestra, and then wouldn't you know it, a couple of them are missing a couple of weeks later, because it sounds like, honestly, from the amount of information that you're getting from the Calgary Philharmonic, it's basically nothing. I mean, is the orchestra even saying who was removed at all or no?
They have not said who was removed. When I did go to them for follow-up trying to confirm this, they did say that there were 2 members about whom action was taken, but they didn't give me any further clarification beyond that, citing, again, privacy reasons.
Okay, so the orchestra made the decision to remove the musicians after an investigation. What can you tell me about that? What do we know?
So the investigation began shortly after one of the screenshots in particular that is sort of interest surfaced on the Facebook page of Catherine Needleman, who's an American oboist and advocate for fair treatment of marginalized people in the classical music world. But also separate from that, as I believe was cited on Catherine's Facebook page, as well as just from doing some research, I did find out the orchestra had conducted another investigation into one of the players that was removed last month, back in 2020. And this was over another set of screenshots posted online that included slurs that were publicized by the Instagram account Orchestra is Racist. Now, this investigation was not widely covered at the time, but the Calgary Philharmonic did release a statement to that Instagram account about its investigation, and I've verified that statement is true. And the statement said the orchestra couldn't confirm the origin of the screenshot, but that they did confirm that at least perhaps separately, the musician had used racist and misogynistic language. Now, at that time, the orchestra said in its statement that he had taken ownership of his behavior and that they would, I quote, jointly invest on his journey towards breaking down racist ideologies, and then chose not to dismiss him as a result of this 2020 investigation.
Okay, Josh, I'm curious, what's been the reaction like to all of this news?
I mean, we're in a moment right now where this kind of behavior is being called out in the classical music scene across the world, going back again to Catherine Needleman and her Facebook page and the way that it has become a magnet for conversations about this kind of behavior in the classical music world. It seemed, in fact, possible that her making some of these screenshots public may have even helped lead to this investigation. And, there are a lot of screenshots, many of which are unattributed, for a variety of reasons that are being shared there and elsewhere. And, we are seeing what appears to be a reckoning at the Calgary Philharmonic. It's going to be a question of whether we see this starting to spread even further.
Josh, you're obviously continuing to follow the story. What's next?
I'm asking questions. People know I'm asking questions, and I want more people to know I am asking questions. And my email is listed publicly online.
Josh, I appreciate you and your diligence and your care in this work. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Josh O'Kane is a reporter at the Globe and Mail. The Calgary Philharmonic is, by the way, not the only orchestra that's been in some chaos lately. The New York Philharmonic found itself under fire after a recent New York Magazine article detailed accusations of a sexual assault that happened in 2010 and also how the orchestra handled it. It is the first time that horn player Kara Kaiser has come forward publicly to discuss what happened. A group of musicians are now advocating for change there. They were in New York recently, demanded the orchestra dissolve a reported non-disclosure agreement involving Kara. Listen, this is a story with a lot of details and one that is still evolving, but it does speak to the larger issue when it comes to making classical music orchestras and music schools safer, particularly for women. Lara St.John is a Canadian violinist and a member of the Order of Canada. She is also a survivor of sexual assault, and she was helping lead those demonstrations in New York. I caught up with her about all of this, and just, again, a warning, this conversation could be difficult for some folks. It does include accounts of sexual assault and rape. I started off by asking Lara why she wants to see Kara's NDA lifted.
Because Kara should be allowed to speak. After all of this that's happened to her over the past 14 years, the details of her assault have become public thanks to Sammy Sussman in New York Magazine, but she's still not allowed to talk about her tenure situation, the reason why she didn't get tenure. She's not allowed to talk about the other player in the orchestra. She's just basically being silenced. And those NDAs are, in fact, as of today, illegal. Because everybody's realized how incredibly damaging it is to silence women who have been already punished by being assaulted. And unfortunately, it doesn't become illegal retroactively, but we think the New York Phil should just do the decent thing and just squash that NDA and just get rid of it and dissolve it completely. The settlement agreement, everything.
What has the response been like so far?
Zero. Yeah, we had a protest. It was me and Catherine Needleman were co-protesters, and we had a whole bunch of people there. I had done a petition. I got 6,000 people, more than that, to sign it. I printed out all the names. I also printed out all the reasons people had for signing it. There was a lot of enough New York Phil, stop silencing Kara, and all this kind of thing. Yeah. And then I took that to both the co-chairman of the board and the CEO by hand. We took it to the to backstage and handed it off to Adam Crane, who's the something other. He promised he'd get it to all three men. And and then on Monday, we got this thing from Gary Gensling, who's the CEO, saying we are not able to comment, even if there is or not an NDA. So, they're just basically being completely obtuse about the whole thing and hoping it'll go away. And that's what they all do, these orchestras. They're just kind of like, hey, if we just kind of like sweep it under the carpet, maybe it'll all go away. And, I'm very experienced with especially schools doing that. And I just don't think it should be allowed anymore. It's 2024, for God's sakes, let women speak.
Can I ask you, you went public with your story nearly 5 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about what happened when you shared your story and maybe some of the changes that came of it?
Well, I heard from a lot of people, um, mostly women, just hundreds and hundreds who got in touch with me after that. And it was
Hmm.
all a great big, hey, this also happened to me at this school, at your school, at all these schools. It was quite a lot to take at the time. The Curtis Institute, which is where I was abused and raped when I was 14 years old, and they knew about it. Um, they tried to shut up their alumni, then they apologized for that. Then I basically they didn't do anything. They were hoping that it would go away until I wrote an open letter and said, you guys have got to get an external report, not some sham report like you did in 2013 when this bubbled up. And so this is in 2019. And finally in 2020, an external report came out from Cozen O'Connor, finding me totally credible. Also found, 20 other people to whom this had happened. The school was sort of a horrific hotbed of child abuse, basically. And I guess they've done a few things. I think last year they said, okay, teachers can't teach at home anymore.
Hmm.
Like last year. So this is, 20 years after places like Amsterdam Conservatory did such a thing. So they're way behind. And I mean, the school, there's a lot of great things about Curtis. And I hope they're changing, because obviously a lot of people have had good experiences there. A lot of them being men.
I want to come back to the Amsterdam example that you just raised, this idea of, certain places have taken a lot of steps years and years and years ago that other schools and other philharmonics here have not. I want to come back to that in just a moment. Let me say this. You're currently working on a documentary. You're speaking to survivors of abuse, both in music schools and in orchestras here in North America and around the world. What is it about these institutions, you think, and the way that they're run that can make women and also musicians of other marginalized groups feel vulnerable and unsafe?
Well, for schools, to which I can firsthand talk about, there's a problem with the hierarchy. Some of these teachers are considered like, gods, and they're given godlike power, actually. And music is one place kind of like, like you don't have 12-year-old lawyers or 8-year-old physicists, I mean,
Right.
it's one place where you do start very, very young. And these gurus of learning are given so much power over the students that it's really ridiculous. Like, you absolutely have to do what the teacher says. You see it also in gymnastics and dance, but classical music, especially violin, piano, and to an extent cello, where you do have to start. I started when I was 2.5.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to start very, very young. I mean, it's a breeding ground for predatory behavior. And not only children, but also like at the college level and everything. Like I said, I heard from hundreds and hundreds of women. And there are some people like Stephen Ships, who's now in federal prison in Michigan, who had 40 years of complaints against him. And it wasn't until a student reporter, Sammy Sussman, actually the same one who just brought out the New York Phil article, brought out an article in the student newspaper. So everybody. Another problem is the institutional complicity, not only in schools, but also in orchestras. It's such a small profession, and it's very, very competitive. It starts very, very young. And in a lot of places, it's incredibly male dominated. And so, I mean, there's kind of no there's no place for women to speak up. There's nowhere to go. There's nobody to talk to without it getting back to your, say, perpetrator or their friends, and then they can blacklist you and ruin your career. So, there goes your livelihood.
I know it may seem obvious to some folks listening, but can you just lay out the stakes and the huge cost to orchestras and to music schools if women and girls do feel unsafe there?
Well, in schools, for example, like I mentioned in the hierarchical problem that they have is, if you say, my teacher harassed me, that teacher will be on your jury. He will be probably on various competitions or auditions that you do. He's got friends who are going to be on those places. If he says, oh, she's like problematic, they start whisper campaigns. And because the profession is so small and so competitive, those work. And a lot of times in orchestras, you'll have, all male sections, and they want their buddies to get in if there's an opening and things like that. So they'll actively go against, the whole tenure process is seriously flawed in orchestras as well. And it really makes it impossible for anyone to come forward about these things. And, look, I came forward in 2019 It was 35 years after what happened to me. And I had to know that if I never played another note in my life, I would still survive. Like I wouldn't starve. So then I see that I was sort of representing people in a way who are just 20 or 25 or so, and they feel as though they cannot come out because they can't come out because this kind of abuse has been accepted for so long. And there's still the old boys club almost everywhere, especially in various instruments. There's still all sorts of, it's a fallacious hierarchy. And somehow that patriarchy has to be brought down. Otherwise, women will never be safe.
You're in the process of making the documentary. And as you're making this documentary, you sort of, I'm assuming you've come across some best practices across the world. You mentioned Amsterdam as one of those examples earlier of the idea that they said no more lessons at home. What are some of the other best practices that you've come across?
Well, I really do hold up Amsterdam Conservatory as kind of a beacon of hope because not only that, when they built the new building in 2007, every single classroom door is glass.
Oh, wow.
The whole thing is glass, and there are no locks whatsoever in the entire conservatorium. You can't teach at home. And the whole building itself is transparent. And they have something called team teaching, so that no one professor has complete control over the life of any one student. So, they've realized at this point the serious problem in classical music, and they've done something about it. They've certainly done way more than anyone in Canada or the US. I was recently playing a concert at the Royal Conservatory in Toronto. I went and just kind of looked around at their classrooms, and yeah, there's a window, but it's 7 feet above ground, and there are locks on all the doors. And I'm just kind of like, wait a second, why isn't there a window where people can see in? Why do you have to be a basketball player to see in?
Well, I was going to say, were the Amsterdam changes, like, were those sort of intentional, like with a view to sort of changing a culture in the place?
They were intentional because one of the women in my documentary gave a complaint in 2001 about a teacher who was then kicked out of all of Holland. Unfortunately, he then went on to England and continued doing the same thing for 20 years. Finally, something caught up with him, and his trial is in July in London. Wow. But they knew about this. And when they moved from the old conservatory to the new building, they had all of those things in mind. Like, we need to make sure that our students are safe. And so they built the building like that. In Michigan, when it all came out about Stephen Ships, the University of Michigan spent like $2 million to put little glass panes in all the windows. I mean, it's not a lot, but it's something. And I mean, it's such a no-brainer. Why are teacher studios, why don't they just have windows and no locks? I mean, they tell all this stuff about privacy and this and that, but I'm sorry, why does a teacher need privacy when he's teaching young people and students? So McGill also, they recently had to suspend a teacher there for various things, and there they have no windows and all the doors have locks. I mean, it's a really small thing, and I think it would just make people. I think it would just make them feel much safer.
I think I'm really like just struck by the simplicity and the obviousness of the solution, right? Like, right. you sort of start at a place where you're going like, well, how are you going to change the workplace culture? How are we going to encourage, a different kind of thinking in this place? And the answer is like, actually, you just need windows and no locks, and begin with that place. And maybe that's obviously not the only thing. Yeah, obviously not the only thing that you do. But it's just like such a strikingly straightforward solution. That I'm just really like sitting with the obviousness of it. Listen, we've mentioned the name Catherine Needleman a few times in this conversation. Yes. She's an American oboist. It's her Facebook page that has kind of become this place where people end up sharing a lot of their stories. You and Catherine are pushing for fairer treatment of marginalized peoples in the classical music world, but that also means more women are becoming more comfortable enough to come forward and share their stories with you. What do you hope happens as a result of your work?
Well, like I said, back in 2019, I was kind of the Catherine Needleman of the time. Hundreds of people reached out to me. What she's done with her Facebook page is she has kind of created a forum, I guess, in a way. She's sort of the lightning rod. People write to her and she redacts it because obviously a lot of these depraved men are quite litigious, and they might be in a place where the statute of limitations has expired, and so therefore you're not allowed to say this man did this to me because of statute of limitations. I mean, it's all very, very complicated. So she just redacts everything, and then finally, these stories are getting out there. I mean, at this point, I think she's put out anonymously, she calls it the Queen of Filth Digest, because that's what somebody called her. And anonymously, she's put out over, I think, like 140 anonymous stories at this point.
Wow.
Like she does the digest, and it's in bunches of 10 to 12. And some of them are just, they're heartbreaking. A great part of them are from women who are no longer in the field, because they just, it's hard enough to be in a competitive field of extremely specialized art, and then to be abused and harassed at the same time. This makes it like nearly impossible to continue, and so a lot of people just did not continue because you get abused, and it really kind of ruins what it is you're supposed to be doing in the first place, which is kind of the love of music and all this kind of stuff. But for a lot of people, it just becomes too much, and they have to get out of the field completely, which I call a huge brain drain. And so does Catherine Needleman. I mean, we just think that women should be given an equal playing field, and they should be allowed to do what they love happily and healthily. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen anywhere in our field.
But as you do this work, as you commit yourself to this work, what do you hope changes? What are the changes that you're hoping to see?
Well, orchestrally, certainly for Catherine, it's very important that the tenure process be either revoked or it just isn't fair. That it's basically your colleagues, and if you're the one woman in a brass section of men, how it doesn't make any sense, especially if one of them says, "Oh, she accused me of rape, so like vote her out." For me, I just want schools to become safer. I mean, we're talking about the same thing, me and Catherine, but I'm more about the institutions of learning, and she's more about the orchestral institutions. We just want things to be really transparent. Like, for example, the New York Philharmonic right now is doing an investigation into these two, I guess I have to say the word alleged predators, but and then also Calgary, like they did this investigation. Why isn't that public? Why isn't it public the way the Curtis Institute, when they did theirs, they made the entire thing public. Cleveland Orchestra, when they got rid of Bill Prussell and Massimo La Rosa, they made that entire thing public. Why can't these guys do that 5 years later? Things should become more transparent, not less. So we're fighting for transparency, for change, for little things like windows in studios, and just the possibility of having women not be, women and marginalized people, obviously there's that's another huge problem, but we want it to be even and equal, and we want women to be able to get the same education as men, which is not possible. I mean, look at me. I was forced to leave the school. My rapist got to keep teaching there until he died. I don't think that's fair. And I want fairness, and I want these institutions to answer for what they have allowed to happen for all of these years.
Lara, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your insight and your wisdom and your dedication to this fight. Thank you so much for your time and for all of that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Lara St.John is a Canadian violinist and documentary filmmaker. She's also a member of the Order of Canada. She was speaking about how to make orchestras and music schools safer for women. That is a bit of Bubamara, composed by Melissa Peranosic and performed by Lara St.John. That is it for the podcast today. Listen, before I let you go, I just wanted to say congratulations to the Griffin Poetry Prize winners. The prize was handed out last night in Toronto. It went to Self-Portrait in the Zone of Silence. This is a collection by the Spanish poet Homero Arides, and he was translated into English by Irish-Canadian writer George McWhirter. That prize is worth $130,000. For more on that story, you can go to cbcnews.ca. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. This show is called Commotion. By the way, you can find us on YouTube. We are also on Instagram at CommotionCBC. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud, and I'll see you tomorrow.